snow was falling so heavily that Christmas Eve that it looked like the entire city had been dipped in quiet white light. Boston always felt colder in December, but that night the cold carried a kind of loneliness that pressed against my ribs as I pushed open the door of Armand's, the fanciest restaurant I had ever stepped into. The warmth inside rushed over me instantly, so luxurious it almost felt like a judgment. Soft jazz played over the gentle hum of conversation. Families gathered around polished tables, parents helping their kids cut into perfectly roasted chicken couples smiling as candle flames reflected in their glasses. I pulled my coat tighter around me, brushing the melting snow from the sleeves. The hostess glanced up, looked me over quickly, then asked without hesitation, "Are you here to bus tables or pick up an order?" The question stung more than it should have. My coat was old wool, worn thin near the pockets, and my boots were scuffed at the toes. But it still shocked me how confidently she assumed. "I am here for a reservation," I managed to say. Her eyebrows twitched upward as if she needed a moment to rearrange her assumptions. "Name, Lila Hart." She scanned the list, nodded, then grabbed a menu and led me toward table 7. She said nothing, but the air around her felt stiff and apologetic in a way that was too little and too late. I sat down and smoothed my dress beneath the table. Green satin. I had saved it for something special. I had not been on a date in a long time, and my best friend insisted this blind date would break my streak of bad luck. A decent guy, she promised. Sweet, smart, normal. But the table stayed empty. 10 minutes passed, then 20. A waiter came by with water, and I refused it, pretending I was not desperate to be acknowledged by anyone at that point. 30 minutes. I pulled out my phone and saw nothing. No missed call, no message, no explanation. When the door opened again, cold air rushed in along with a tall man in a charcoal coat. He scanned the room, spotted me, and instantly his shoulders slumped. Like he had just found the wrong answer on a test he already hated taking. He walked toward me without enthusiasm, as if fulfilling an obligation he regretted. So he said, sliding into the seat across from me, "You are Rachel's friend." I forced a smile. "Yes." "You must be Evan." He took one look at my dress, my hair, my face, and drew in a long, disappointed breath. "This is not going to work." I blinked. "Excuse me." He shrugged, like he was choosing a sandwich, not talking to a person. "You seem nice, but you give off a vibe. You know, assertive, independent. That is not really my type. I prefer someone softer." He said it so casually it almost sounded like he was discussing weather forecasts. Then he stood. "Merry Christmas," and he walked out. No apology, no shame, no hesitation. Just gone, leaving behind the faint smell of expensive cologne and humiliation so sharp it felt like a slap. Around me, families laughed and clinked glasses. Children giggled as their parents wiped marinara from their cheeks. Romance blossomed at nearby tables, and I sat there with an untouched glass of water and a heart sinking deep into my stomach. I stood quickly, grabbing my coat, ready to leave before anyone could witness the tears threatening to spill. I made it only 2 steps when I heard a tiny voice right behind me. "Why are you sad?" I turned. There she was. A little girl no older than 3, wearing a puffy red coat and holding a small white bear with one ear slightly bent. She had big hazel eyes, the kind that saw far more than adults realized. I swallowed hard. "I am not sad, sweetie." She tilted her head, unconvinced. "Your eyes look like when my daddy drops a plate." She stepped closer, lifting her bear. "Do you need a hug?" The question knocked the air from my lungs. Not from pain, but from the softness of it, the unexpected kindness, the tiny mercy. Before I could answer, she placed her small hand on mine, warm and impossibly gentle. "It is Christmas. Nobody should cry today." Something inside my chest cracked open. I crouched instinctively to meet her eyes, my voice trembling. "What is your name, Hazel?" she said, proudly holding up her bear like he was her personal assistant. "This is Mr. Whiskers," a low voice called from a few feet away. "Hazel." A man approached, tall, steady-dressed simply but neatly. His presence was calm in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. He knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, you cannot run off like that." Then he looked at me. "I am so sorry. Hazel is very friendly. She does not always understand personal space." I wiped at the corner of my eye, embarrassed. She is fine. More than fine. The man gave me a small, warm smile. Hazel studied my face again, then whispered, "You still look sad. My daddy says hugs fix sad things." She stretched her arms toward me with absolute conviction, and that was the exact moment my Christmas Eve changed. Forever. Daniel straightened gently, placing a hand on Hazel's shoulder, as if he were reminding himself to breathe as much as reminding her to stay still. I stood there, caught between embarrassment over being rejected minutes earlier and an almost disorienting wave of tenderness from this tiny stranger offering me comfort with a stuffed bear. I wiped my palms on my coat, trying to regain some dignity, as Daniel spoke again, his voice low and apologetic. "I am sorry if she startled you. She has a way of adopting people instantly." I shook my head. "She did not startle me. She just surprised me." Hazel lifted her bear higher. "Mr. Whiskers says surprises can be good." I almost laughed at how serious she was. Daniel exhaled a tired breath that softened into something like amusement. Hazel let the lady enjoy her evening. We should get back to our table, but Hazel did not move. Instead, she grabbed my hand again and whispered loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Do you want to sit with us?" Daddy said we can share food as long as we say thank you. Daniel closed his eyes and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Sweetheart." Hazel turned to him. "But she is alone. It is Christmas." Daniel looked at me apologetically, his face tightening with the kind of discomfort only a parent in public could have. "Her mother passed when she was 1. Holidays are complicated." I nodded slowly. "I understand." But Hazel had already made her decision. She squeezed my hand and tugged determinedly toward their table. Daniel hesitated, clearly torn between correcting her and avoiding a meltdown. "If you want to sit for a moment just until she settles down, you are welcome to," he offered quietly. "No pressure at all. I should have declined. I really should have." My heart was bruised, my pride limping, and the last thing I needed was to sit with strangers on the night I had already humiliated myself. But when Hazel looked up at me with those wide hazel eyes full of hope and innocence, something inside me gave way. "Maybe just a moment," I said. She squealed and tugged harder. "Come on." I walked behind her as she proudly marched back to a small corner table. Their table had 3 chairs instead of 2. A coloring book lay open. A crayon rolled near Hazel's seat. A small cup of hot cocoa sat half full with a marshmallow melting slowly along the rim. Daniel pulled out the chair beside Hazel for me, a gesture so gentle it made my throat tighten. I settled into the seat cautiously, unsure if I should even be there. Hazel plopped into her own chair and pushed her bear toward me like an offering. "Mr. Whiskers likes you." "He only likes nice people and dogs." That made Daniel finally laugh under his breath, a sound warm enough to melt frost. "I am sorry again," he said, turning to me. "Hazel normally does not do this, except sometimes she does." Hazel corrected, swinging her legs. "You always say that, Daddy." Daniel shook his head helplessly and handed her a fork to keep her occupied. I forced a small smile, unsure how to behave when I had not even processed the disaster that brought me here. The waiter approached, eyebrows lifting at the unexpected third person at the table. Daniel nodded quickly. "She is with us. Just water for now, please." The waiter left, and silence tried to settle in, awkward and heavy. Hazel took care of that instantly. "Do you have a family?" she asked. Hazel, Daniel warned. What I am asking nicely. I blinked at the directness of it. I hesitated before answering. "My parents live out of state. It is just me here." Hazel nodded, as if taking notes for later. "Do you eat Christmas cookies alone?" Her voice had a tremble of genuine concern. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Then do not do that," she said firmly. "Daddy makes good cookies. Well, he buys them, but they taste like someone nice made them." Daniel muttered, "Wow, thank you, Hazel." She gasped. "Daddy, can she have a cookie?" "Not now, sweetie," he said. "We are eating dinner." Hazel crossed her arms, thinking deeply, then brightened. "After dinner, then." "My daddy always shares." Daniel leaned slightly toward me and spoke quietly. "I promise I am not trying to force an entire meal on you. I can walk you to the door after she calms down." I nodded, appreciating the respect in his tone. but Hazel reached across the table and touched my wrist. Are you feeling better now? I was not expecting the question. Or the sincerity. I am okay, I said softly. She leaned closer. You looked sad. Daddy says when people look sad, we have to help. Daniel stared at the table for a moment, emotion flickering across his features. I lost track of my breath for a second. This little girl had more compassion than most adults I had met. The waiter returned with my water. I reached for the glass, then froze as Hazel slid something across the table toward me, a piece of red candy wrapped in shiny foil. For later, she said, So, you smile when you get home. The lump in my throat nearly won. Daniel watched me carefully as if trying to understand the full story of what had brought me to that restaurant alone on Christmas Eve. And maybe he saw more than I expected. After a few minutes of listening to Hazel's rambles about snowflakes and the grumpy cat next door, I cleared my throat. I should probably head out soon. Hazel's head snapped around, but we did not finish talking. Her voice wavered small and disappointed. Daniel gently touched her shoulder. Sweetheart, she has her own Christmas. Hazel pressed her lips together, then turned back to me, eyes full of hope she barely knew how to hide. Come again, you can sit with us next time. Her innocence was almost too much to bear. I stood and slipped on my coat. Thank you both. Really. Hazel gasped suddenly, like she remembered something urgent. She hopped down, ran after me, and wrapped her arms around my legs. Merry Christmas, Miss Lila. My heart nearly dissolved. Daniel approached slowly. Thank you for being patient with her. I shook my head. She was the kindest thing that happened to me tonight. Hazel held up her bear in goodbye. Mr. Whiskers, too. I smiled, blinking back emotion, then stepped into the cold. Snowflakes hit my cheeks, but for the first time that night, it did not feel like the world was pushing me away. It felt a little more like someone small had pulled me in. The snow had thickened by the time I stepped out of the restaurant, the kind that muted every sound and made the world feel both beautiful and unbearably lonely. And as I crossed the parking lot with my coat clutched tightly around me, the cold cut straight through the fabric and into my bones, reminding me that Christmas Eve had a way of amplifying whatever you already felt inside. I reached my car, breath fogging in the air, and pressed the unlock button, grateful for the familiar click. But when I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine gave a weak cough, sputtered, and then went completely silent, as if it too had given up on me tonight. I tried again and again, each attempt more frantic than the last, but the engine refused to catch. The dashboard flickered dimly, then died. My stomach dropped. Snow blew sideways across the windshield in harsh white lines, wind whistling through the cracks in the parking lot pavement, and for a moment I just sat there shaking from cold and frustration, and something deeper I did not want to name. I leaned forward, forehead against the steering wheel, whispering, "Please work, please." But the only response was the hollow quiet of the failing battery. I got out and opened the hood, though I had no idea what I was looking for, and the cold hit me like a slap, turning my fingers stiff in seconds. A couple walked past on their way to their car, laughing, their arms full of gifts, not even glancing my way. Another family hurried by, the father carrying a baby wrapped in a red blanket, while the mother rushed to open the door. Christmas Eve was a night for togetherness, and standing there alone in the swirling snow made the rejection inside the restaurant feel sharper than ever. Just when I was about to give up and crawl back into the cold interior of my car, I heard footsteps crunching through the snow behind me, slow and steady, not rushed or annoyed, just purposeful. I turned and saw Daniel walking toward me with Hazel bundled in his arms under a thick pastel blanket, his other hand holding a large black umbrella that shielded her small face from the snow. He stopped in front of me, eyes filled with concern rather than pity, and said softly, "I had a feeling you might need some help." His voice was calm in a way that made my panic quiet instantly. I stared at him, embarrassed but relieved, and murmured that my car would not start. He nodded like he had already expected it, shifting Hazel slightly so she could peek out at me. Her small voice rose from beneath the blanket. "We came to help you." The words were simple, but they hit something inside me I didn't realize had been waiting to be acknowledged. Daniel set Hazel in the back seat of his SUV with her stuffed bunny to keep her warm, then returned with a small black booster pack in hand, something I had seen in hardware stores but never imagined I would need. My dad was a mechanic, he explained as he opened my hood, and he would probably haunt me if I didn't know how to jump a dead battery in the middle of a snowstorm. I laughed a sound that surprised even me, carrying a kind of relief I had been ignoring all night. The wind blew harder as he attached the clamps, his breath fogging in the cold as he leaned over the engine hand, steady despite the weather. I watched him from the side, the halo of snow around his dark coat, and something about the quiet competence with which he worked made the world feel a little less frightening. When he started the booster, the engine coughed, sputtered again, then roared to life, the sound loud and reassuring in the frozen silence. I let out a shaky breath I did not realize I had been holding. Daniel closed the hood gently, then looked at me with that same steady calm. "There you go. You should be fine driving home, but take it slow. The storm is getting worse." Before I could thank him, Hazel appeared beside us, having run from his SUV to my car, with her little boots leaving tiny prints in the snow. She held something in her mittened hands, reaching up to me. "This is for you," she said proudly. I looked down and saw a tiny pink handkerchief with embroidered stars along the edge, worn, but clearly cherished. "My mommy used to say this helps when someone is sad." The innocence in her voice made my throat tighten, and I knelt, despite the cold meeting her eyes as I took the handkerchief gently. "Thank you, Hazel," I whispered, my breath catching in my chest. "That means more than you know." She smiled like she had just accomplished something important, something her heart knew before her mind could understand. Daniel placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, guiding her back toward the SUV. When he looked at me again, snowflakes clung to his dark hair and coat, making him look almost unreal under the streetlight. He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully, then said softly, "Nobody should be alone on a night like this." The sincerity in his tone wrapped around me like warmth in the freezing air, something gentle, something human, something I had not felt in a long time. I watched him buckle Hazel into her seat, her sleepy eyes still peeking at me over the edge of her blanket. When he closed the door and returned to stand beside me, he offered a small smile. "Get home safe, Lila. Merry Christmas." And then he stepped back, giving me space, never overstepping, never assuming, just being there when I needed someone without asking for anything. As I sat in my now warm car engine humming steadily, I watched his taillights disappear into the snow and felt something shift inside me, something fragile but real, like the first spark of warmth in a long winter. I had not expected kindness tonight, and yet it had found me anyway. 3 days passed before I saw them again. 3 days of trying to convince myself that what happened on Christmas Eve had been nothing more than a kind gesture from a kind man and his sweet little girl. 3 days of folding the handkerchief Hazel gave me and placing it carefully in my bedside drawer like it was made of glass. On the 4th morning, the snow finally softened, the streets thawed slightly, and for the first time since that night, the world felt less heavy. I had planned to spend the afternoon running errands and maybe stopping by the park for a walk, but as I stepped outside my apartment building, holding a small paper bag containing the washed handkerchief, I froze at the sight in front of me. Hazel stood on the walkway with her tiny boots planted firmly on the pavement, bundled in a lavender coat and a knitted hat with floppy ears. She spotted me instantly and waved so hard she nearly toppled over. Behind her, adjusting the strap of a picnic bag over his shoulder, was Daniel. He looked up surprised, but not startled, as if life had simply decided our paths would cross again. Hazel ran toward me with the determined wobble of a toddler on a mission and stopped just short of colliding with my legs. "You found us!" she announced proudly, as if I had been on a quest. I knelt down, smiling despite the shock. "Actually, I live here, remember?" Her eyes widened as if this were brand new information. "You live here? We live here too." Daniel approached a little out of breath, shaking his head gently as he reached Hazel and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not in the same building," he clarified, offering me a warm, almost apologetic smile. "She has a very flexible interpretation of distance." I handed Hazel the small paper bag. I washed it and thought she might want it back. Hazel held the bag to her chest like it contained treasure. "Thank you," she whispered, before slipping her small hand into mine as naturally as breathing. The gesture startled me not because it was inappropriate, but because it felt so instinctive, so trusting. Daniel noticed but didn't rush to pull her away. Instead, he exhaled softly. "We were actually heading to the park for a small picnic," he said, lifting the strap on his shoulder. "Hazel insisted we bring extra snacks in case we saw friends." Hazel beamed. "And we saw you." My lips parted, unsure if I should accept the invitation I had not officially been given. But before I could overthink it, Hazel tugged my hand. "Come with us. Please." She stretched the word in that way children do when they believe the universe will bend to their desires. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, a little embarrassed but earnest. "You're welcome to join us if you're not busy. No pressure. It's just the park." Something in his voice, in the quiet respect he always maintained, loosened the hesitation inside me. I nodded. I'd like that. Hazel cheered as if I had agreed to go to Disneyland, and before I knew it, she was pulling me down the walkway toward the park, while Daniel followed behind us with a soft laugh. The park was coated in a thin layer of snow, sparkling under the afternoon sun. Families strolled along the paths, children built small snowmen, and dogs bounded joyfully after sticks. Daniel chose a spot near a cluster of evergreen trees and spread a large plaid blanket on the ground, brushing off the snow with the sleeve of his coat. Hazel plopped down immediately and dumped out the contents of the lunch bag. 2 sandwiches, a container of fruit, a thermos, and an explosion of tiny snacks clearly chosen by a 3-year-old. As I sat beside her, she scooted closer until her small form leaned against my arm. "You feel warm," she murmured matter-of-factly. Daniel glanced up from unscrewing the thermos lid, and for a moment our eyes met. There was something soft there, something unspoken, and I looked away before it could mean too much. He poured hot chocolate into 2 small cups and handed one to Hazel, who promptly held it up toward me. "You can have mine," she said solemnly. I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, that's yours." Hazel frowned in concentration, then pointed at Daniel. "Daddy has more." Daniel laughed quietly. "She's not wrong." He poured a 3rd cup and handed it to me, fingers brushing mine lightly, a touch that sent a current through me, not because it was intimate, but because it wasn't. It was gentle, natural, not forced. We ate quietly at first, listening to the muffled sounds of the park. Hazel talked in bursts, telling me about a squirrel she named Button and a snow angel she made that morning. She showed me her mittens decorated with lopsided stars made from felt pieces her preschool teacher had glued on. When she leaned against me again, small and warm and impossibly trusting, something in my chest tightened. Daniel watched her with a tenderness that was impossible to miss, his expression softening every time she spoke. He had the look of a man who had rebuilt his world around his daughter's laughter. I learned small pieces of him that afternoon, not through confessions, but through observation. The way he wiped Hazel's mouth gently after she smeared fruit juice across her cheek. The way he automatically kept the wind off her by adjusting his coat to block the breeze. The way he spoke to her like she was the most important voice in the room. Those details spoke louder than anything he could have told me about himself. At one point, Hazel crawled into his lap, then immediately reached back out to pull on my sleeve. "Sit close," she demanded. I hesitated, but Daniel offered a quiet nod, shifting slightly to make room. When I sat beside them, Hazel nestled between us, her head resting partly against my arm and partly against Daniel's chest. The 3 of us formed a small huddle against the cold, and for the first time in a long while, I felt less like an outsider in my own life. A light breeze rattled the branches above us. Hazel closed her eyes, content, and murmured, "This feels like a good family day." The words hit both of us at the same time. Daniel froze for a second, his breath catching, and I felt my heartbeat stumble. He didn't correct her. He didn't explain or redirect or laugh it off. Instead, he whispered soft enough that only I could hear. "She misses having someone like you around." The sentence lingered in the air, warm and fragile and terrifying in equal measure. I looked down at Hazel's tiny gloved hand wrapped around mine, and felt something shift inside me, subtle but undeniable, like the first quiet crack of ice just before it melts. When the sun dipped lower and the air grew colder, we packed up slowly. Hazel insisted on holding my hand the entire walk back. As we reached the street, Daniel thanked me again for joining them. His voice was steady, but there was something deeper beneath it, something cautious but hopeful. I told him thank you too because I meant it more than he could know. Hazel squeezed my hand one last time before Daniel lifted her into his arms. See you next time, she said with absolute certainty, as if she had already decided our paths would cross again. And as I walked back to my apartment, still holding the faint warmth of her touch, I realized I hoped she was right. The following week moved in quiet rhythms, the kind that almost made me forget how fragile everything still was, as if life were giving me a soft place to land before reminding me it could still take the ground out from beneath me. Work at the assisted living center was busy but manageable. The holiday crowd had thinned, and most residents were calmer now that the Christmas rush had passed. I told myself to stay focused on the routine to keep my heart steady, but every time my phone buzzed and Daniel's name appeared with a picture Hazel had drawn, or a message saying she wanted to show me her new mittens, something warm flickered inside me before I could shut it down. I tried to keep the balance to respond kindly, but not too quickly to smile at Hazel's drawings without letting myself imagine a life I had no right to want. But the truth was simple. I missed them, more than I should, more than I had expected, and it scared me. On Thursday afternoon, I arrived early for my shift and was assigned to help Mrs. Whitmore, one of the wealthier residents whose son ran a law firm downtown. She was elegant in the way only old Boston money could be, with neatly curled silver hair, pearl earrings, and a voice that never needed to rise above a murmur to be heard. I had always been polite around her, respectful, careful, but today she watched me with sharper eyes than usual as I adjusted her pillows and checked her chart. "You've been glowing lately," she said, her tone poised somewhere between observation and accusation. I froze for a split second before smoothing the sheet over her lap. "Just staying busy, Mrs. Whitmore." "Busy," she echoed, then tilted her head ever so slightly. "Or distracted." Her gaze moved to my face, studying the faint smile I hadn't realized I was wearing. I tried to push the warmth down and focus on my task, but she wasn't finished. "I saw you humming in the hallway," she added dryly. "People who hum are either in love or losing their minds." I let out a quiet breath, attempting to diffuse the comment with a small laugh. "Maybe I'm just happy the holiday chaos is over." She watched me as if she could see every truth I was trying to hide. "Men like the one you're thinking about don't choose women like you," she said suddenly. Her words hit me with the force of cold water. I looked up, startled, unsure how she could know anything at all. I hadn't mentioned Daniel. I hadn't even let myself say his name out loud at work. But she continued, unfazed by my shock. "You're lovely, dear, but lovely doesn't buy you a seat at their table. Not when there's a child involved. Not when there's a dead wife to compare you to." My throat tightened. I forced myself to keep adjusting the blanket so she wouldn't see my hands tremble. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was stating a fact the way people from her world often spoke, as if reality were a cold ledger of what belonged where. And in her ledger, men like Daniel and women like me were written in different columns. I swallowed hard. "I should go check on Mr. Alden before his appointment," I said quietly. But she wasn't finished. "Be careful," she warned, her voice softer now. "Those men can be kind without meaning anything by it. And it is always the woman who ends up holding the broken pieces." I nodded politely, left the room, and closed the door behind me before the burn behind my eyes could break loose. In the staff bathroom, I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge to steady myself. Her words echoed in the cold tiles around me. "Men like him don't choose women like you." I hated how quickly they landed, how familiar they felt, how easily the old wounds reopened wounds from relationships that ended the same way with me standing alone, wondering what I lacked. I took a long breath, washed my face, and returned to work with a smile fixed so tightly it hurt. That evening after my shift, I came home to my dim apartment, dropped my keys on the table, and sank onto the couch. I stared at the ceiling, trying to slow my breathing, but my phone buzzed before I could gather myself. A text from Daniel. "Hazel drew something for you. She insisted I send it." I hesitated before opening the photo. It was a crayon drawing, bright and messy and heartbreakingly sweet. 3 stick figures holding hands. A big one labeled Daddy, a smaller one labeled Hazel, and next to them one with long hair labeled Lila. My chest tightened so sharply I pressed a hand against it. I blinked hard, then harder, but the tears came anyway. Not sad tears. Not exactly. Something deeper. Something that mixed longing and fear and a sense that this drawing was too precious for someone like me to deserve. Before I could stop myself, I typed a message. Thank you. Tell her it's beautiful. Then, after a long stretch of staring at the screen, I added a second message. I think maybe I should step back a bit, just so she doesn't get too attached. I erased it, rewrote it, deleted it again. Finally, with a weight in my stomach, I typed slowly. I think it's best if we give things a little space. I need to focus on work right now. I hit send before I could lose my nerve and immediately wished I had waited. Daniel replied several minutes later. If that's what you need, I respect it. We'll be here if you need anything. His message was kind, too kind, which only made the ache sharper. I set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark until my eyes adjusted to the quiet. The apartment felt colder than it ever had. I went to bed earlier than usual, but sleep wouldn't come. At one point, I heard distant fireworks leftovers from someone celebrating late. Each burst reminded me how small my world suddenly felt without their warmth in it. The next morning, while pouring cereal into a bowl, I realized the kitchen felt heavier without Hazel's laughter echoing in my memory. It felt wrong how quickly a child could fill the empty spaces of a life, and worse, how easily those spaces expanded when they were gone. That afternoon, as I folded laundry, my phone buzzed again. A new message. This time from Hazel, or rather from Daniel, letting her choose the emoji. It was a single heart drawn with her shaky finger on the screen. No words. Just that small, hopeful shape. My breath caught. I set the phone face down and wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I had done the right thing, I told myself. I had to protect her. I had to protect myself. But sitting there with clean clothes piled beside me and the apartment silent as snow, I wasn't sure I believed it. The morning after I sent that message telling Daniel we needed space felt strangely hollow, as if I had emptied out something essential inside myself and left nothing but echoes behind. I went through my routine like someone moving underwater, brushing my hair, packing my lunch, locking my apartment door, all while repeating the same line inside my head. It is better this way. It has to be better this way. By the time I reached the assisted living center, the winter air had sharpened the kind of cold that makes every breath feel like it could crack. Inside, the halls were quiet except for a television playing an old sitcom, its laugh track oddly jarring in the calm. I told myself to focus, to keep my head down, to push every thought of Hazel's crayon drawing and Daniel's gentle message into a far corner where it could not bruise me. I was checking charts at the nurse's station when the doors opened and a flurry of voices rose. A resident had suddenly collapsed in the lobby and everything snapped into motion. I rushed toward the commotion, my heartbeat loud in my ears. A small cluster of residents stood frozen as an elderly man struggled to breathe, clutching his chest. He was pale, sweating, and dangerously confused. The receptionist fumbled for the phone to call emergency services. I knelt beside him, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. "Sir, stay with me. Tell me if you can hear my voice." He blinked weakly, his breaths shallow and uneven. I turned to the receptionist. "Call for the crash cart and alert the on-call physician." She hurried away, hands shaking. I loosened the man's collar and checked his pulse. Rapid, unsteady. Fear rose inside me, but years of training steadied my movements. His condition was deteriorating too quickly. Someone else rushed toward us from the opposite side of the lobby. I looked up shocked. It was Daniel. He was holding a folder of paperwork, his coat dusted with snow, and his face shifting instantly from surprise to concern the moment he saw the scene unfolding. "What happened?" he asked, dropping to his knees beside me without hesitation. His voice was firm, calm, the voice of someone used to taking action, but smart enough not to dominate the space. "Chest pain, difficulty breathing," I said quickly. He nodded, not interfering, only stabilizing the man's posture as I instructed. "Tell me what you need." That simple sentence hit me harder than I expected, like warmth against the cold fear inside me. "Hold his shoulders steady," I said. "Make sure he stays upright." Daniel placed his hands gently but securely, murmuring reassurance to the man who hardly had the breath to respond. The crash cart arrived. I grabbed the stethoscope and listened. His heart sounded unstable, irregular in a way that made the floor seem to tilt beneath my knees. "We need the AED," I said. "Now!" The nurse beside me opened the defibrillator case with trembling hands. I moved quickly, attaching the pads to the man's chest, my fingers steady because they had to be. The machine analyzed his heart rhythm. In the corner of my eye, I saw Daniel watching me, eyes focused, jaw tight, as if willing the situation to bend toward survival. Shock advised, the machine announced. "Clear," I said firmly. Everyone stepped back. The shock lifted the man's body slightly a moment that always sent a jolt through me, no matter how many times I had seen it. Come on, breathe." For a painfully long second, nothing happened. Then his chest lifted with a ragged, desperate gasp. Relief washed through me so intensely I almost collapsed beside him. I checked his pulse again. Steadier now. Faint, but present. EMS arrived within minutes and took over. By the time the man was loaded onto the stretcher, color had returned faintly to his cheeks. I stood slowly, muscles trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. I hadn't realized Daniel was still right beside me until he spoke softly. "You saved his life." I let out a shaky breath, brushing a stray hair behind my ear. "I did my job." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, you did more than that. You stepped into chaos and brought order. You were calm. You were brave." His voice dipped slightly quieter and more honest. "You were extraordinary." Those last words landed deeper than I wanted them to. I turned away, gathering the scattered medical supplies to regain my composure. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked, needing to redirect the moment before it swallowed me whole. He lifted the folder he had set aside during the emergency. "My mother left some estate documents she needed me to drop off. I was just leaving when everything happened." His tone softened. "I did not expect to see you." The unspoken truth lingered between us. I had asked for space. I had created this distance, and yet here he was. And here I was shaken more by his presence than by the crisis I had just handled. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. Hazel's name lit up the screen with a picture of her crocheted bear. Daniel hesitated, then answered. "Hi, honey." "No, I am still finishing some things. Did you eat lunch?" He paused, listening. His expression shifted to concern. "Sweetheart, why are you crying?" My chest tightened as I listened to Hazel's small, trembling voice through the speaker. "I miss Miss Lila. You said we could see her soon, and now she is gone." I swallowed the air catching in my throat. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, pained. "Hazel, baby, I told you Miss Lila just needs some time. It does not mean she does not care." Hazel's next words broke something cleanly inside me. But she did care. She smiled at me. She held me. She read me stories. I can tell when someone loves me. "Why is she not here?" I covered my mouth with my hand, fighting the sting behind my eyes. Daniel lowered the phone, his tone gentle but weighted as he said to me, "She misses you." I looked down at my hands, the ones that had just saved a man's life, the ones that had held Hazel close. I realized in that moment how I had convinced myself I was protecting her by stepping back when all I had done was leave her confused and hurting. "She is just a child," I whispered. "She should not be this attached." Daniel shook his head. "Children know who makes them feel safe. They know who makes them feel seen. And you do that for her. You do that for both of us." His voice trembled slightly. "I never meant to overwhelm you. I never wanted you to feel obligated." I stepped back because I was afraid I admitted. Afraid that if I let myself care too much and it all disappeared, I would not be able to handle it. Daniel's eyes softened in a way that made my heart clench. Life does not always give us guarantees, but sometimes it gives us the right people at the right moment. Hazel's small voice piped through the phone again, softer now. "Miss Lila." "Are you there?" I hesitated, breath caught in my throat. Daniel held the phone out. "She needs to hear you." I took it slowly, lifting it to my ear. "Hi, sweet girl," I murmured. Hazel sniffled. "Are you coming back?" I felt the weight of every choice I had made, every fear, every longing. "Yes, sweetheart. I am here. I am not going anywhere." Her relieved little sigh cracked something open inside me, something I had been holding shut out of fear. When the call ended, Daniel looked at me with an expression that held no pressure, no expectation, only gratitude and quiet hope. "Thank you," he said softly. In that moment, I understood something I had been resisting. Sometimes life does not show you what matters through grand gestures. Sometimes it shows you in the middle of chaos in the sound of a child's trembling voice, in the steady presence of someone who stands beside you when they do not have to. And sometimes, the moment you realize what matters most is the moment you stop running from it. Hazel's fever hit on a Thursday evening, the kind of sudden spike that takes a child from cheerful to limp in minutes, and Daniel called me with panic woven through every word. I had just stepped into my apartment after a long shift when my phone buzzed. The moment I heard his voice tight and breaking, something inside me reacted before my mind even caught up. "Hazel is burning up. She will not eat. She keeps crying for you. I do not know what to do." His fear was real, raw, and unfiltered in a way I had never heard from him before. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and a container of the homemade chicken soup I had prepared that morning without knowing why. I told myself it was a coincidence, but deep down I knew the truth. I had made it because part of me still wanted to take care of them. Snow fell thick and wet as I drove, coating the windshield and blurring the streetlights until they looked like smudges of gold in a cold world. When I reached Daniel's house, the front porch light was already on. He opened the door before I could knock. His hair was a mess, his eyes red with worry, his shirt wrinkled like he had paced for hours. "Thank God you are here," he whispered, stepping aside. I walked into the warm glow of the living room and saw Hazel curled on the couch under a soft blanket. Cheeks flushed, curls damp with sweat, breathing unevenly as she whimpered for someone to hold her. For me. The sight slammed into my chest with a force I could not name. Hazel's eyes opened halfway when she sensed movement. Her gaze flickered to me, unfocused but recognizing. A small hand reached out. "Mommy, do not leave!" The air left my lungs like someone had punched me. Daniel froze behind me, his breath catching audibly. I knelt beside the couch, brushing Hazel's hair back from her forehead. "Sweetheart, it is me. I am right here. I am not going anywhere." Her small fingers latched onto mine with surprising strength, as though she feared I would disappear if she let go. I eased myself onto the couch and gathered her into my arms. Her head rested on my shoulder instantly, as if her little body had been waiting for this exact shape, this exact place. Daniel watched us silently, his expression shifting through a storm of emotions I could not name. Relief, fear, awe. Something deeper I was afraid to look at too closely. I fed Hazel small spoonfuls of soup until she drifted back into a fevered sleep, her breathing slow against my chest. I felt her warmth, her weight, the trust she placed in me without hesitation. It was a trust I had not earned through blood or legal ties, but through presence, gentleness, and something that lived far beneath the surface. When she finally slept, I looked up and saw Daniel leaning against the doorway, hands in his hair, staring at the two of us like he was witnessing something sacred. He walked toward us slowly, almost cautiously, and sat on the ottoman across from the couch. His elbows rested on his knees, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you see this? Do you feel what I feel right now?" I swallowed hard, not knowing how to answer without unraveling. Daniel's eyes flickered to Hazel's small hand that clung to my sweater even in sleep. She has never done this with anyone, not even with my mother, and I realized why the sight made him tremble. For a man who had lost so much, whose heart had been stitched together with fear and guilt, Hazel giving me this kind of instinctive, innocent love was both a miracle and a threat. A miracle because it was pure. A threat because losing it would destroy him. He let out a slow breath, voice cracking. "This feels like a family." The room went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater and Hazel's soft breaths against my neck. I felt a surge of warmth rise in my chest and burn right into the parts of me I had tried to freeze for years. But right behind it came fear, dark and heavy. I looked at Daniel, my own voice trembling. "And that terrifies me." His expression softened, not offended, not surprised, as if he had expected my fear. Maybe even shared it. Terrifies me too, he admitted quietly. But that does not make it any less true. For a long moment, we just sat there, the quiet stretching between us in a fragile thread that held more weight than any confession. Hazel shifted in her sleep, pressing closer to me. Her small voice whispered a single broken word. "Mommy." Daniel inhaled sharply, his eyes shining with something raw and unfiltered. I closed my eyes as the words settled deep in my chest, sinking past fear, past doubt, past all the walls I had built. It hit me that I loved her. Not in the abstract way you love a child who smiles at you. I loved her with a kind of protective tenderness I could not undo even if I tried. When her fever finally eased a little, Daniel covered her with a warmer blanket, brushing his fingers tenderly across her cheek. Then he looked at me again. "I do not want to pressure you. I know what you are afraid of. I know loss leaves marks that never fully fade. But I need you to understand something. You are not just someone Hazel likes. You are someone she trusts, someone she feels safe with, someone she loves." I looked at Hazel's tiny fingers still curled around mine and whispered, "She called me Mommy." Daniel nodded slowly. "And you answered like one." The truth in his words left me breathless. I shifted slightly, adjusting Hazel's weight against me. She sighed and rested more fully in my arms. Daniel reached out instinctively to help, his hand brushing my wrist. It was a small touch, barely anything, but the warmth of it traveled up my arm right to the place in my chest where everything was trembling. "You do not have to make a decision tonight," he said softly. "Just stay. Stay until she settles. Stay until you do not feel afraid of the feeling anymore." I settled deeper into the couch, Hazel safe in my arms. Daniel sitting near enough that I could feel the heat from his presence. And for the first time, I did not try to run from the truth. I wanted this. I wanted them. I wanted the shape of this life, the quiet warmth of this room, the way Hazel's breath fell in time with mine, the way Daniel looked at me as if I was something he had been searching for without daring to admit it. The moment burned itself into me with a clarity I could not ignore. I was not afraid because it felt wrong. I was afraid because it felt right, deeply, intimately, unavoidably right. The night stretched on. Hazel slept peacefully. Daniel sat close, his presence steady and gentle. And somewhere between the soft rise and fall of Hazel's breathing and the quiet understanding in Daniel's eyes, I realized something. Families are not always formed by blood or vows. Sometimes they begin in the softest moments, in whispered fears, in a child's trembling voice, saying the one word that breaks you open, "Mommy." And sometimes the moment you answer is the moment your life changes forever. The morning after Hazel's fever finally broke should have felt peaceful, but instead I woke up with a knot in my stomach that pulsed like a heartbeat. I had stayed the night on Daniel's couch with Hazel curled into me, her tiny hand gripping my sweater like an anchor, even in sleep, and while part of me had melted at the innocence of it, another part of me felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff with the wind pushing hard against my back. When Hazel woke up, her curls plastered to her forehead and her eyes still heavy with sleep, the first thing she did was whisper my name. Not Mommy this time. Just Lila, soft and warm and full of trust. She wrapped her arms around my neck, and for a brief second everything felt simple. But simplicity has never lasted long in my life, and the moment I stepped outside into the cold air, leaving Daniel's house behind, I felt my chest tighten. Fear slid in like an unwelcome guest. Not because of anything Daniel had done, but because of everything I had started to feel. I drove home with the heater on full blast, but the cold in my chest would not go away. Love, or the beginning of love, has a way of shining a light on every insecurity, every old wound, and mine were deep. By the time I reached my apartment, doubt had wrapped itself around me like a second coat. Who did I think I was to fit into their life so easily? What if Hazel got attached only for me to disappoint her? What if Daniel realized he deserved someone more stable, more accomplished, more everything? I spent the day cleaning my apartment, even though it was already clean, scrubbing counters, folding blankets, rearranging things that did not need rearranging. Anything to avoid thinking. But thinking found me anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Hazel half asleep, whispering, Mommy, and Daniel looking at me with something gentle and terrified in his eyes. By evening, I had convinced myself that stepping back was the safest thing to do. For me, for Hazel, for Daniel. I told myself distance would protect all of us from the pain that might come later. When my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel saying Hazel wanted to FaceTime, my heart lurched, but I ignored it. Not because I didn't want to talk to her, but because I wanted to talk to her too much. I told myself I needed space. I told myself they needed space. But the truth was simpler. I was scared. Fear is funny like that. It makes you believe you are protecting people when really you are just protecting the version of yourself that once got hurt. I avoided them for 3 days, telling myself it was temporary. Daniel noticed immediately. His messages were kind, gentle, never demanding. Just checking in. Hazel misses you. Only if you are free. Hope your week is okay. Every text made my throat tighten, but I still couldn't bring myself to respond the way I wanted to. On the 4th day, I found a small package in front of my door. No note. Just something wrapped in brown paper with uneven tape. I carried it inside, sat on the couch, and opened it slowly. Inside was a pair of tiny knitted mittens, bright yellow, crooked and uneven, stitches too tight on one side, too loose on the other, and tied around them with red yarn was a piece of construction paper. A child's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under falling snow. A big one labeled Daddy, a little one labeled Hazel, and another one labeled Lila drawn with a big smile and a heart above her head. My breath hitched when I flipped the paper over and saw Hazel's messy handwriting. So your hands stay warm like a mommy's? Love, Hazel. My vision blurred instantly, tears rising faster than I could blink them away. I pressed the mittens to my chest, my fingers trembling as though the yarn carried heat straight to my heart. I sank onto the couch and cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not out of sadness, not entirely out of fear. Mostly out of the overwhelming realization that someone, a little girl who had lost so much, was choosing me. Not because she had to. Not because I was perfect, but because I had shown up, because I had held her, because I had cared. And that kind of chosen love is the most fragile and powerful thing in the world. When the tears slowed, I looked at the mittens again. My fear had been loud these past few days, screaming warnings of heartbreak and inadequacy. But Hazel's little stitches whispered something else entirely. Courage. Not the grand cinematic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that grows out of small hands and big hearts. The kind that asks nothing except that you try. I picked up my phone with trembling fingers and finally responded to Daniel. I'm sorry I disappeared. Can I come by? The message was barely out when he replied. Yes. Anytime. We are here. The drive over felt different this time. Not rushed, not panicked, just intentional. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the streetlights, landing softly on the windshield, and for the first time in days, I did not feel cold inside. When I arrived, Daniel opened the door before I knocked. He looked both relieved and exhausted, like he had been holding his breath since the moment I stepped away. Hazel peeked out from behind him, her smile small at first, then bursting into something huge and bright. She ran to me with her arms wide. Lila, I made you something. I knelt down, already choking up. I got your gift. Hazel beamed. Do you like being warm? I hugged her fiercely, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her small body, the pure sincerity of her affection. Yes, sweetheart. I like being warm. Daniel stood behind her, quietly watching us. When I met his eyes, there was no accusation. No frustration, just understanding, and something tender. Fear is normal, he said softly. Courage is choosing anyway. I exhaled a breath I did not realize I had been holding. I'm trying. You do not have to have it all figured out. Just stay. Just be here. Hazel looked between us, confused, but smiling. Are we eating dinner or hugging forever? I laughed, wiping my eyes. Maybe both. And in that moment, standing in Daniel's doorway with Hazel's arms wrapped around me and warmth blooming in my chest, I realized something important. Fear always comes first, but courage, even the smallest kind, changes everything. Snow had already started falling again by the time I walked into Daniel's living room that evening, the kind that drifted slowly like soft pieces of silence. Hazel was asleep on the couch, curled into a tiny ball beneath a blanket with cartoon penguins, her little mittened hands resting under her cheek. She had insisted on wearing the mismatched gloves she made for me because she wanted us to match like family, and the thought alone tightened my chest in a way I didn't want to examine yet. Daniel gently lifted her and carried her to her bedroom, the door clicking softly behind him, while I waited in the glow of the Christmas lights strung along the staircase banister. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin and asks questions you are not sure you are ready to answer. When he returned, he rubbed his hands together as if trying to gather courage, then motioned toward the couch. We sat down with a polite distance between us, the kind that acknowledged everything simmering beneath the surface. The room smelled like cinnamon and pine, and the only sound was the faint hum of the heater. Finally, Daniel exhaled and said, "I didn't want to push you." I nodded, staring at the colorful lights reflecting off the coffee table. "I know, you were kind about it." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice lower. "But I could feel you pulling away, and I thought maybe I did something." The way he said it carefully, gently afraid of the answer, made me swallow hard. "You didn't. It was me." He lifted his eyes to mine, patient, steady, but searching. I took a breath, unsure how to unroll the tangled fear in my chest into something he could understand. "I got scared," I admitted. "Scared of getting attached, scared of Hazel getting attached, scared that one day you'd wake up and realize I don't fit into your world." His expression softened in a way that made the confession both easier and harder. "Lila." He said my name like it mattered. My world does not look the way people think it does. It's not glass buildings and conference rooms. It's Hazel needing someone to sit with her when she's too scared to sleep. It's making dinner and hoping she eats at least half of it. It's being exhausted and still showing up anyway. I looked at him, truly looked, and saw a man who had been holding his life together with quiet determination, with no one to witness how much it cost. When he spoke again, his voice cracked at the edges. Losing Lena broke me in ways I didn't expect. Not just as a husband, but as a father. Hazel was just a baby. She didn't understand where her mother went, and I didn't know how to explain it. He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I built walls around us because I didn't have another way to survive it, and when Hazel started talking about you like—" He trailed off, looking at the Christmas tree lights instead of me. I panicked. I didn't want her heart broken again, and I didn't trust myself not to break it. Hearing him say that, the fear behind it, the tenderness, I felt something inside me shift. "You're not the only one who's been scared," I whispered. "I've been hurt too. I've been treated like an option so many times that I started believing maybe that's all I was worth." Daniel turned toward me fully, then his knees brushing mine, a warmth that sent a quiet tremor through me. "You were never an option. Not for me." His words sank through me slow and deep. The room felt smaller suddenly, but in a comforting way, like the world outside had disappeared into white silence, and only this moment remained. "I'm afraid of what this could become," I admitted softly. "But I'm more afraid of walking away from it." Daniel's shoulders lowered a fraction, as if he had been holding tension for weeks, and finally let one thread slip loose. "That's the thing," he said quietly. "Love is always scary at the start, but what matters is that you don't run from it. You walk toward it even while shaking." My eyes stung. I didn't want to cry, but the truth he spoke was too real, too familiar, too needed. "I didn't run," I whispered, voice trembling. I paused. "That's all." He let out a breath that sounded like a release. "Then come back, Lila. Not because Hazel adores you, though she does. Not because you're good for us, though you are. Come back because you want to be here." The way he said it, the honesty, the steadiness, felt like an invitation into something tender and terrifying and real. I looked down at my hands, at the uneven yellow mittens Hazel had made. Courage. I heard Hazel's voice echo in my memory. Warm hands like a mommy's. I lifted my gaze. "I'm here." Daniel's eyes softened in a way I had never seen before. Something equal parts relief and gratitude, and something else I didn't yet have the courage to name. Snow began falling harder outside, tapping gently against the windows as though urging us to fill the silence. Daniel shifted closer, but not too close, leaving space for me to choose. So I did. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He let his cheek rest lightly on my hair, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where this will lead, but I'm willing to find out if you are." I nodded against him, my eyes drifting shut. Me too. For the first time in a long time, the fear in my chest loosened its grip, replaced not by certainty, but by something gentler. Hope. Quiet, fragile hope. We sat like that for a long time, with the snow falling outside and Hazel's soft breathing drifting down the hallway, and for the first time since this all began, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Christmas morning came with a soft glow that filtered through my curtains like a quiet promise, and for the first time in years, I woke up without the heaviness that usually greeted me on holidays. I lay still for a moment, listening to the faraway sound of church bells in the neighborhood and the muffled laughter of kids sledding somewhere down the street. Then, my phone buzzed with a picture message, Hazel in fuzzy reindeer pajamas holding a plate of misshapen sugar cookies. Under the picture, Daniel had typed 3 words, "She misses you." My heart squeezed warm and aching. Before I could overthink it, I sent back, "I miss her too." Then almost immediately after an invitation popped up, "Brunch at our place. Nothing fancy. Just us. You okay with that?" I stared at the screen longer than necessary, fear and anticipation twisting together in a way that felt painfully human. Finally, I typed back, "Yes." When I pulled into their driveway an hour later, the house looked different. Snow had piled up along the walkway, and colorful lights blinked slowly along the porch railing. But it was more than that. Something about the glow from inside felt like belonging. I wasn't ready to admit that yet, even to myself. When I knocked, Hazel swung the door open so fast the wind almost pushed her back. "Miss Lila." She flung herself into my arms like she hadn't seen me in months instead of just a day. She smelled like cinnamon and syrup. I hugged her tight, breathing her in as if she were something fragile and precious. Daniel appeared behind her wearing a soft gray sweater and the kind of smile that warmed a room without trying. "Merry Christmas, Lila." His voice was gentle, like he was afraid to disturb whatever was forming between us. I stepped inside. The living room was cozy chaos. Wrapping paper scattered on the floor, a small pile of new books stacked near the tree, a half-eaten pancake on a plate Hazel had clearly abandoned in her excitement, and on the fridge, held up by a star-shaped magnet, was a crayon drawing. 3 figures, one tall with dark hair, one small with pigtails, and one woman in a blue dress. Above them in Hazel's uneven letters, it read, "My family." I froze. Completely. It felt like someone had reached inside me and gently turned a key I didn't know was there. Daniel stepped beside me, hesitating. "She drew that this morning," he said quietly. I didn't tell her to. I didn't say anything. She just drew what she felt. I swallowed hard. "It's beautiful." His voice dropped even lower. "She thinks so too." Hazel grabbed my hand, then tugging excitedly. "Come see my presents. Come see my new book. Come see everything." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Before I knew it, she had pulled me into the living room, plopped me on the couch, and climbed right into my lap with a storybook about a penguin who wanted to fly. Daniel went to the kitchen and returned with 2 mugs of hot cider, setting one gently in front of me. Hazel leaned back against me as I helped her turn the pages. Daniel sat across from us, his eyes soft and contemplative, like he was gathering courage but hadn't found the moment yet. When Hazel jumped off the couch to retrieve something from her room, Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She asked about you all day yesterday." His voice was low, steady. "She kept asking if you were coming back." My breath trembled. "And what did you say I said that I hoped you would?" Our eyes held for a long moment, something warm and unspoken passing between us. But before either of us could say more, Hazel reappeared holding a small box wrapped in crooked tape. "This is for you," she said proudly. I blinked, caught off guard. "For me?" She nodded hard. "I made it at school. With glue. A lot of glue." Daniel chuckled softly. Believe her, there was definitely a lot of glue involved. I opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny clay ornament shaped like a heart. It was lumpy and uneven and absolutely perfect. On the back in smudged ink was one word: Mommy. My breath caught. Hazel looked up at me with eyes too big, too bright, too full of hope for someone so small. I made it because, well, just because. She leaned her head against my arm, content and trusting. I didn't know how to speak around the knot in my throat. Daniel stood slowly and came to sit beside me on the couch, leaving only an inch of space between us. His voice was almost a whisper. You don't have to answer her. Or me. Not until you're ready. But I want you to know something, Lila. You already feel like home to her. And if I am honest, you feel like home to me too. The words sank into me with a quiet, breathtaking weight. I didn't speak, but I didn't pull away either. Hazel climbed into Daniel's lap, still clutching the clay heart, and the three of us sat there pressed together warm and close while snow drifted past the windows in slow white waves. After a while, Hazel whispered sleepily, Can we stay like this forever? Daniel looked at me as if asking the same question silently. I brushed a curl from Hazel's cheek and whispered, I hope so. Hazel sighed happily and curled between us, drifting off in seconds. Daniel leaned back against the couch, his shoulder brushing mine. Not too close. Just close enough to say everything without words. And there, surrounded by the soft glow of Christmas lights and the steady rhythm of Hazel's breathing, I realized something quietly, profoundly true. This house didn't feel like someone else's place anymore. It felt like the beginning of my own. The quiet hum of evening settled over the house, the way soft snow settles on pine branches, gentle and unassuming, and I found myself standing in Daniel's kitchen helping him rinse tiny flecks of flour off the counter while Hazel hummed in the living room, arranging her stuffed animals into what she proudly called a concert. The lights were dim, warm, casting a golden glow across the room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt grounded steady, like every part of me had finally exhaled. Daniel moved beside me, his arm brushing mine as he reached for a towel, and that simple touch sent a soft ache through my chest because it felt right natural, like something I had known in another lifetime. We washed dishes in companionable silence until Hazel peeked in from around the corner, her eyes shining with excitement. Daddy said there is a surprise soon, she whispered loudly, which completely defeated the purpose of whispering, then giggled before darting back into the living room. Daniel cleared his throat, suddenly looking younger and more uncertain than I had ever seen him. He dried his hands slowly, almost methodically, as if rehearsing something in his head. I watched him inhale deeply. He didn't speak at first. He only looked at me. Really looked as if gathering the courage needed for whatever was coming next. Lila, he finally said, his voice steady but quiet. Can you come to the living room for a moment? The way he said it made my breath catch. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and followed him. The living room was lit only by the glow of the Christmas tree and a small lamp near the couch. Hazel was seated neatly on the rug, her stuffed animals arranged in a semicircle beside her, as if they had been invited to witness something important. When I stepped closer, she grinned and patted the carpet next to her. Sit here, right here next to me. I sat, feeling my pulse flutter. Daniel stood in front of us, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his eyes warm but nervous. Hazel bounced slightly, barely containing her excitement. Daddy practiced this, she whispered loudly to me. 3 times. Daniel shot her a look that held equal parts amusement and despair, and she giggled again, covering her mouth dramatically. Then the room shifted. Not in sound, not in temperature, but in feeling, the way air changes before snow begins to fall. Daniel exhaled, walked a single step forward, and then lowered himself onto one knee. Not in a romantic gesture, not the traditional way men kneel for proposals. This was different. He knelt facing both of us, his eyes moving from Hazel's small, hopeful face to mine, and in that moment I saw every fracture he had carried since losing his wife. Every quiet fear he had tried to hide, every brave step he had taken to build a life for his daughter, and every tender moment he allowed himself to feel something for me. Lila, he said softly, I am not asking you to marry me today. I am not kneeling for a ring or a ceremony. I am kneeling because I want to speak from the only place I know how." His hand gently brushed Hazel's hair back as she leaned instinctively into his touch. "Hazel and we have been learning how to be a family that feels whole again, and somewhere along the way, you became part of that without even trying. You made space for us in a way I never expected. You made room for joy where there had been silence. And most of all, you gave Hazel something I could never give her alone: hope." I swallowed hard, my eyes stinging with tears. I tried desperately to blink back. Daniel continued, his voice trembling just slightly. "I want to build something with you. Slowly, carefully, honestly. Not to replace anyone, not to fill a space that belonged to someone else. But because I choose you, because we choose you." Hazel crawled closer to me and placed her tiny hand in mine, squeezing gently as if sealing the words her father had spoken. When Daniel looked at me again, his expression held no pressure, no expectation, only truth. "If you will have us," he said softly. "We want to be a family with you, not someday, not in theory, now." My breath broke. Hazel tugged at my sleeve, her voice small but steady. "Mommy Lila." The sound of it shattered something inside me, not in pain, but in release, in the quiet, breathtaking realization that after years of being overlooked, dismissed, chosen last, I was being chosen now. Chosen first. Chosen fully. Hazel climbed into my lap, curling her arms around my neck, as if she had always belonged there, and I felt her heartbeat pressing into my chest. Daniel stayed on one knee, waiting. Not rushing. Not assuming. Simply hoping. I reached out with one hand, touched his cheek, and whispered the only answer that had ever felt true. "Yes." His eyes closed in quiet relief as his hand covered mine, warm and grounding. Hazel squealed, clapping her hands before throwing her stuffed bear into the air in celebration. We all laughed, the sound blending together like something soft and new and healing in ways none of us had ever expected. Daniel stood and pulled both Hazel and me into his arms, holding us close, his breath unsteady against my hair. "You are home," he murmured. "If you want to be." I pressed my forehead against his chest. Hazel squished happily between us and let the truth settle into my bones. "I already am." Morning sunlight drifted through the curtains in soft ribbons, settling over the kitchen in a way that made everything feel gentler than it had any right to be, and I found myself standing at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Hazel sat on the counter beside me, swinging her legs and humming a tune she invented on the spot. She wore a tiny apron with her name written in glitter paint, and every now and then she would nudge my shoulder just to remind me she was there, as if afraid I would disappear if she stopped touching me for even a second. Daniel moved behind us, setting plates on the table, his hair still damp from the shower, and his voice low as he murmured something about syrup and silverware. It should have felt ordinary. It should have felt like nothing more than a simple morning routine. But something about the quiet rhythm of it made my chest swell with a warmth I had never known before. After breakfast, Hazel insisted we all bundle up and go outside to build what she called a family snowman. Not just any snowman, she clarified, but one with 3 hearts, one for each of us. Daniel helped her roll the base while I shaped the middle, and Hazel carefully placed buttons she had saved from an old craft box down the front, counting each one aloud. When she stuck a slightly crooked carrot into its face, she stepped back and nodded proudly. "He looks like us," she declared. Strong and silly and happy. Daniel scooped her up, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, and I felt something deep settle inside me, a certainty that this was what life was supposed to feel like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but small moments stitched together with care. As weeks passed, our days began to weave into one another in ways that felt organic and slow, like a story unfolding without force. I helped Hazel with her preschool projects, cutting construction paper into stars, while she narrated elaborate stories about dragons and brave girls who saved the day. On evenings when Daniel had late meetings, I would tuck Hazel into bed reading her favorite picture book until her eyes fluttered closed and her tiny hand slipped from mine. Sometimes after she slept, Daniel and I would sit on the couch with cups of tea, talking in quiet tones about nothing and everything about work. Frustrations, childhood memories, dreams we had shelved long ago, and were now unearthing cautiously. There was no rush, no pressure, just the slow, steady unfolding of trust. One afternoon on my way to pick Hazel up from preschool, her teacher handed me another drawing. This time it was a house with 3 stick figures holding hands. Underneath it read, "My family. Mommy Lila, Daddy, me." I stared at it longer than I should have, the lines blurring as my eyes watered. When Hazel ran to me moments later, launching herself into my arms with her usual enthusiasm, I held her tighter than usual, inhaling the scent of crayons and winter air in her hair. That evening, Daniel found me in the living room holding the drawing. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me and took my hand, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. "She sees you," he finally murmured. "And so do I." Life did not transform overnight. It didn't suddenly become perfect or magically simple. Hazel had tantrums when she was tired. Work pulled Daniel away more often than he wished. I still had moments when fear surged through me, whispering that I might lose everything I had barely begun to allow myself to love. But every time doubt rose, something quietly beautiful pushed back. One night, I woke to find Hazel crawling into bed between us after a nightmare, clutching her stuffed bear. She nestled against me, her small fingers curling into my shirt, and whispered, "Mommy Lila, I had a bad dream, but I am safe now." Daniel's arm shifted around both of us, his hand resting gently on my hip, grounding and sure. In that moment, the fear that had lived in me for so long dissolved like snow melting in sunlight. Another evening, after a particularly long day, Daniel came home exhausted and collapsed on the couch. I sat beside him, rubbing his shoulders as he exhaled into the quiet. "Thank you for being here," he said softly, not looking at me, but letting the words linger in the air. "Not for Hazel. For me." He reached for my hand, intertwined our fingers, and rested them on his chest as if anchoring himself. Slowly, quietly, beautifully, we became a family. Not through grand declarations, but through small choices repeated every day. A few weeks later, on a warm afternoon that hinted at the end of winter, we took Hazel to the park. She ran ahead of us, her laughter echoing across the playground as she climbed the slide and waved proudly. Daniel and I stood watching her shoulders brushing the wind, tugging softly at our jackets. He turned to me, then his expression open in a way I had never seen before. "Lila," he said gently, "I know life is unpredictable. And I know we can't promise perfection, but I want to build a life with you that is steady and real, one day at a time." I smiled, my heart swelling. "We already are." Hazel slid down the slide in a burst of joy, running toward us with outstretched arms. She grabbed one of my hands and one of Daniel's, swinging them with unfiltered delight. We walked together down the path, hand in hand, the sun warming our backs, and the sound of Hazel's laughter twirling in the air like a melody meant to guide us forward. Later that night, as we lay together on a blanket in the backyard watching stars appear one by one, Hazel nestled between us, I whispered the truth that had been forming quietly in my heart. It all began the night I thought I was unlovable. Daniel kissed my forehead, and ended with you being loved more than you ever imagined. Hazel squeezed my hand, sleepy but smiling. "You came back for us," she murmured. I pressed my cheek to her hair. "I never left." And under the soft glow of the night sky with the 2 people who had become my home, I finally believed it. What you just watched was not simply a love story or a Christmas miracle. It was a reminder that sometimes the nights that break us are the ones that quietly guide us toward the life we never knew we could have. If you felt even a small ache in your chest when Hazel asked me why I was sad, if you saw a bit of yourself when I sat alone at that table on Christmas Eve, wondering if love had simply forgotten me, then stay with me a moment longer. Because stories like this are not just entertainment for people like us. They are echoes of the pain we once carried, and proof that healing doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in wearing a red velvet dress and holding a stuffed bear. Maybe you have lived through a night where someone walked out on you without explanation. Maybe you have sat in a crowded room feeling like the only person no one was looking for. Maybe you have learned to convince yourself that you are fine being alone, even when a quiet part of you still hopes someone will choose you without hesitation. If that is true for you, then I hope this story did more than fill 20 minutes of your evening. I hope it gave you a breath of warmth you did not expect. Because that is why this channel exists. It is for people who have been hurt but still believe in softness. For those who have lost someone and rebuilt their world from pieces. For parents raising children alone and wondering if there is space left for their own heart. For widows still learning how to smile again. For the ones who say they are okay, even when they are not. You are why we tell stories like this. Because when Hazel looked up at me with her big, hopeful eyes and asked if I wanted to be her new mom, it wasn't just a moment in a script. It was a mirror held up to every person who has ever longed to belong somewhere. It was every child who wishes for a family, every adult who carries guilt for wanting more, every heart that wants to be held without needing to be perfect. And if you stayed with the story all the way to the end, then maybe some part of you recognized the feeling of being chosen after years of thinking you were invisible. Maybe you saw yourself in the way I hesitated every step of the way, too scared to hope, too scared to lose again. Or maybe you saw yourself in Daniel, afraid to open a door he once closed to survive. The truth is, we keep telling these stories because they remind us that even after heartbreak, life does not stop offering second chances. And you deserve to see love that grows gently, slowly, without forcing itself. You deserve to see families built not from perfection, but from courage. You deserve to see people choose each other every day, even after life has bruised them. If this story touched your heart, if it made you tear up, or smile, or remember something you thought you forgot, then I don't want this to be the end of our time together. Because on this channel, every week we bring another story that heals a different corner of the heart. Stories of widowed dads finding home again, single moms being seen for the first time in years, lonely people discovering that love does not age, it does not expire, and it does not forget the ones who wait with quiet hope. And if you want more moments like the one Hazel gave me, moments that remind you of kindness and courage and the small miracles that still happen in this messy world, then tap that subscribe button and stay. Stay for the next story that might be the one you needed today. Stay because your heart deserves softness. Stay because even if you feel alone right now, you aren't. Not here. Not with us. Thank you for being here with me, for sharing this moment, and for letting this story become part of your evening. Until next time, keep believing in the quiet kind of love, the kind that arrives when you least expect it, but always exactly when you need it most.